I was alone in the dark, deep underground in a place everyone called the Hole. But how did I end up locked inside a solitary cell? A few months earlier, I was filming with my friends for our Paranormal YouTube channel. There were 4 of us: Mara, our skeptical leader, Eddie, the gear guy, Jess, the believer, and me, Ty, the idiot who always says, "I'll do it," whenever something terrifying comes up. We got permission to film inside Dawson State Penitentiary, an abandoned prison left to rot since the 90s. The place was wrecked, overrun by animals. But what everyone whispered about was the underground section. Solitary confinement. 20 cells, no windows. Guards used to control the lights, and sometimes they'd leave inmates in the dark for days. Most who went down there came back broken. Some never came back at all. Cell 12 was the one everyone feared. Stories said men went insane in there, or worse. One supposedly tore his own fingernails off, trying to dig through the wall. They said something was already in that cell. So naturally, I volunteered to spend 20 minutes inside. Lights off, just me and a night vision lens. Sounded like great content back then. Mara said she picked cell 12 because it was in the middle of the hallway. But the second I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The room was empty, just concrete walls, a drain, and a slab. I lay down while Mara jammed a flashlight in the door so it wouldn't close completely. The last thing we needed was to actually get trapped. They set up the audio recorders, turned off the lights, and the darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't see my hand. The air felt heavy, like the dark itself had weight. "You guys there?" I whispered. No answer. I called again. Nothing. Later, I found out they'd wandered off for a few minutes, just to mess with me. Those minutes were hell. The silence down there isn't normal. It's thick. You start hearing your own body, heartbeat, breath, even blood in your ears. Every small sound echoed. I swore I started imagining things. A footstep, a breath, maybe air brushing against my neck. My brain was scrambling for anything familiar. When they finally came back over comms, "We're still here." Relax. I was already on edge. That's when I heard it. Scratch. At first I thought it was a rat, but it wasn't random. Scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Eddie said, "Hold up. That sounds like code." I didn't get it at first, until he said, "Dude, it's spelling your name." My stomach dropped. I laughed nervously, tried to brush it off, but then it started again. Same rhythm, same pauses. Eddie whispered, "It's spelling all our names. Jess, Mara, me." That's when I felt it. Cold air right next to my cheek. Not a breeze from below, like someone leaning over me in the dark. I panicked. Our emergency word was pineapple, and I screamed it. Mara tried to pull the door, but it wouldn't budge. She kicked it. Nothing. Inside, the scratching went wild. No rhythm now, just furious scraping, like claws tearing through walls, the slab, even the floor beneath me. The vibrations ran through the concrete. Then, finally, the door gave way and they dragged me out. My arms burned. When I looked down, there were fresh scratches, shallow, bleeding, spelling one word, "join." We didn't stick around. Later, Eddie pulled the audio. It wasn't just scratching. There were voices. Dozens, whispering inmate numbers, crimes, sentences. Then, all together, they said, "Tyler James Monroe, life, tonight." That's my full name, middle name and all. None of them even knew it. We never posted the video. Mara said people would just call it fake. Eddie said he'd analyze the audio frame by frame, but he never did. Jess refuses to talk about it. And me, I can't sleep in silence anymore. I keep a fan on, music, anything, because now I know what silence really sounds like. Solitary confinement isn't just punishment, it's psychological torture. Scientists say hallucinations take hours or days to appear in total darkness, but I was only in there 20 minutes. That's not enough time for your mind to break, yet it happened instantly. The scratching spelled our names. The whispers knew mine completely. Whatever's in cell 12 doesn't need time to destroy you. It's already waiting. Patient, intelligent, and personal. Abandoned prisons like Dawson aren't just ruins. They're holding something. Fear, pain, and the echoes of every soul that suffered there. The real question is, what's still in cell 12? This next story is one that never really left me. From the moment I stepped into that place, something felt wrong. I figured it was just the atmosphere, the knowledge that people had been tortured, imprisoned, and killed there centuries ago. But after what happened, I'm not so sure it was just my imagination. Some ancient places hold on to things far darker than history. I used to think oubliette was just creepy trivia, a word guides tossed around to make old castles sound scarier. That changed when I visited Warwick Castle in England, the most terrifying experience of my life. Last summer I was there visiting family. We did all the tourist stuff, towers, wax figures, dungeon tours. The castle's history is brutal, and locals swear it's haunted. Halfway through the tour, our guide stopped beside a round iron grate set into the stone floor. Beneath it was nothing but blackness. He explained it was called an oubliette, French for a forgotten place. It was basically a vertical pit where prisoners were dropped and left to die. No stairs, no doors. The only way in or out was through the hole above. Everyone laughed nervously, snapped photos, and moved on. But I stayed. I crouched down, peered through the grate, and waited for my eyes to adjust. That's when I heard it. Stone scraping against stone. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Then silence. Then again. My body locked up. Next came a faint tapping, irregular, like knuckles, or maybe bones, brushing against rock far below. And then a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, just the dry rasp of breath-shaping sounds, like someone trying to speak with a throat too parched to form words. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly fell. The group was already ahead of me. I caught up quietly and didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. I convinced myself it was something normal. Echoes, dripping water, maybe even an animal. That night in my hotel, I had the worst dream of my life. I was at the bottom of that pit. Total darkness. Stone pressing in from all sides. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was feel a presence breathing right next to me. Slow, wet, and human. When I jolted awake, my hands were aching. I turned on the bathroom light and saw my fingernails, chipped and packed, with gray dust, fine, gritty, and smelling like old stone. I hadn't left my hotel room since the tour. I didn't sleep for the rest of the trip. But here's the thing that still haunts me. Oubliettes are sealed. No one's been down there in centuries. Whatever I heard, whatever was moving in that darkness, shouldn't exist. There's something deeply wrong about the Warwick Castle dungeons. I've stood down there myself, and the air feels heavy, like it remembers every scream. So when I hear others talk about feeling that same suffocating weight, I believe them completely. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been there? Did you feel it too? As a corrections lieutenant, I've seen things I can't explain. But the night I learned our tunnels were once used to hide bodies and saw something impossible during my rounds was when I stopped being a skeptic. Honestly, I hope I'm losing my mind because the alternative is worse. I've been with the Department of Corrections for 10 years, working my way up from officer to sergeant and now lieutenant. In that time, I've witnessed plenty. Some of it routine, some of it deeply unsettling. The facility I work at used to be a state hospital decades ago, before it was turned into a prison. I never cared much about its history until things started happening that made me curious and afraid. Older officers told me this place was originally fenced like a hospital compound. Later, it became a work camp and eventually a correctional facility. Turns out, a lot of old hospitals ended up repurposed like that. My first strange experience happened years ago when I was still new on the job. Working in the high security wing, those cells had thick metal doors that locked automatically. either one at a time or all together through a switch system. One quiet night, while checking cells, I heard a loud metallic slam behind me. When I turned around, every single cell door was wide open. Everyone. The inmates were panicking, and I wasn't far behind. After getting everyone secured again, I called my sergeant, expecting a maintenance issue or something mechanical. Instead, he just chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just Ben acting up again." I asked who Ben was. He told me. Ben was a former tuberculosis patient from when the facility was still a hospital. According to him, Ben was harmless, just liked making noise, opening doors and tapping through the floors. I thought he was joking, but when I asked around, other officers confirmed it. They all had stories about the same thing: tapping sounds, windows opening by themselves, objects moving. I tried looking up old records, but they were either missing or too old to trace. Eventually, I shrugged it off. Still, strange little things kept happening. Cups moved. Doors knocked when nobody was there. I chalked it up to fatigue and pranks, until I got promoted and had to start doing basement checks. The basement of the old medical wing is basically a morgue. One night during rounds, I noticed one of the body drawers was open. Irritated, I went in to close it and check for intruders. I didn't find anything, just that uneasy feeling of being watched. When I later asked the medical staff, none of them had been down there in weeks. The next encounter came during a night shift. Most of the high-security inmates had been transferred, so the building was mostly empty. I went outside for a bit, then looked up and saw a human-shaped shadow in one of the second-floor windows, an area that was locked and unused. Only sergeants and above had the keys. The officer on duty confirmed he was downstairs. I watched the silhouette until it vanished. I went up to check. The lights were on, but the moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, like I'd just walked into a predator's den. When I reached the room where I saw the shadow, it was completely empty. No furniture, no coats, nothing that could have looked human. I left fast. After that, things escalated. Abandoned wings would light up at night, flicker, then go dark again. Objects moved on their own, caught on security footage. Inmates started complaining about voices in their rooms, whispering to them after lights out. I've seen chairs slide, balls roll, and even hair shift on its own on camera. I can't show the footage, policy, but it's there. Over time, I learned more about this place's past. Before it was a hospital, it was an asylum. Some rooms still have manacled bolts drilled into the walls. In one basement hallway, someone had carved "run away" into an old wooden door. And below all of it, there's a tunnel system connecting the buildings. When I asked why, one of the veterans said, that's how they moved bodies. Without the patience, seeing, every building connects to the old morgue. One night, while doing rounds in the administration building, I heard rattling from the far hallway. Then suddenly, every office door in the hall started shaking violently, all at once. It sounded like something trying to break out. I bolted back the way I came. When I told my sergeant, he just said, "Yeah, that happens." But the most disturbing thing I've ever seen happened late one night. I saw what looked like a woman in a long white gown standing at the top of the stairs. Our inmates don't wear gowns, and the laundry area was nowhere near there. I thought it was one of our female officers playing a prank. I called out to her, but she didn't respond, just turned and walked into a bathroom. I followed, announcing myself before entering. Inside, the room was empty. No one in the stalls, no one in the showers, just cold air and silence. When I got back to my office, my sergeant called and asked if I was okay. He'd seen me acting weird on the cameras, but swore no one had gone in there before me. That was the last straw. No grand reveal. No ghost hunt. Just the realization that I'd seen something I couldn't explain. What scares me most isn't what I've seen. It's how normal it's become here. A morgue door swinging open means paperwork, not panic. Doors shaking in unison are brushed off with "it happens." Maybe skeptics can explain away one or two things. But when officers, inmates, and staff across decades all describe the same footsteps, the same whispers, the same figures in abandoned wings, coincidence stops making sense. Get ready, because this next story still gives me chills. I've heard about old prisons and castles, where people claim to hear phantom bells ringing. A death knell not for the dead, but for the living. A warning that your time is running out. Reading this story, that's all I could think about. There's no bell in the dungeons of Shillong Castle. The guide made that clear, so how do I explain what I heard? Last year I visited Switzerland, and one of our stops was Shillong Castle, a stunning fortress perched right on Lake Geneva. Parts of it look straight out of a fairy tale: stone towers, sunlit courtyards, views that take your breath away. But once you go underground, the mood changes completely. The dungeons are carved right into the rock, cold, damp, and echoing. Heavy stone pillars still bear rusted iron rings where prisoners were chained. Our guide explained that during the Inquisition, this place held the worst of the worst, people tortured and executed after months or years in total darkness. Then with a small grin he said, "No, there's no bell down here." This wasn't a church. A few people laughed nervously and followed him out. I stayed behind. That's when I heard it. A faint but unmistakable ringing, slow tolls that echoed through the air, like a bell buried behind the walls. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, deliberate. My first thought was that the sound must be drifting in from the nearby village. But when I asked the guide later, he frowned and said, "There are no bells near here, not anywhere below ground." That night, back in my hotel, I listened to the recording I'd made of the tour. The bell was there, but under it, faint, low, trembling, was a man's voice. He was speaking in broken sentences, desperate, almost whispering. I thought it was a prayer at first, until I realized it was a confession. Line after line, his voice cracked with fear. And then, at the very end, he said something that froze my blood. "Ring the bell when it is my turn." The guide's words echo in my head. There's no bell down there. So if there really isn't, what did I hear? Maybe it wasn't history replaying itself. Maybe that sound was meant for me. Venice is breathtaking, but it hides darkness beneath the surface. Locals say the city's stones. Remember the water, that if you stay too long in certain places, the canals themselves start to reach for you. The next story proves it. I know what drowning feels like, not from the ocean or a pool, but because of what happened in an old prison cell in Venice that should have been dry and empty. Last year, I toured the Doge's Palace, which connects to the ancient prison cells known as the Pozzi and the Piombi. The palace is all gold ceilings and lavish halls, but the prisons are a nightmare of stone and darkness. The guide showed us one cell that used to flood whenever the canals rose. Prisoners were chained to the walls, forced to sit for days in freezing water. Some didn't survive. Everyone else in our group hurried past, but I lingered. I knelt down, tracing the dark water stains along the floor. That's when it happened. I felt water, freezing, rising fast around my ankles. I gasped and jumped back, bracing for wet clothes. But when I looked down, my shoes and socks were completely dry. The floor was dry too, dusty, lifeless. I laughed it off, blamed my imagination, maybe the power of suggestion. But that night I woke up choking. My chest burned. My lungs felt like they were filling with water. I coughed so hard I couldn't breathe. My pillow was soaked where I'd been gasping in my sleep. It's been months since that trip, but sometimes I still wake up the same way. Lungs on fire, throat raw, desperate for air, like that cell never let me go. Like something from beneath Venice's waters is still trying to pull me under. The detail that haunts me most is waking up choking, pillow damp, chest burning. That matches the old legends about the Pozzi cells, how the souls of those who drowned there never left, how they dragged down anyone foolish enough to linger too long. So tell me, are you still having nightmares? This next story proves that sometimes it's not just the prisoners who get trapped inside those walls. Old places hold on to energy, dark, heavy, and impossible to ignore. You can feel it in your gut before your brain understands what's happening. That's how Edinburgh Castle felt to me. Everyone else on the tour was laughing, taking pictures, just being tourists, but I couldn't stop thinking about all the pain those stones had soaked up over the centuries. By the time we reached the dungeons, my stomach was tight with unease. They're still down there, beneath the castle, cold stone, chambers where prisoners of war were once crammed back in the 1700s. You can still see what they left behind. Carved names, tally marks, drawings of ships maybe dreaming of freedom. Some carvings even looked like coffins. The guide was wrapping up when I realized I'd fallen behind. The group was heading out, but I stayed back for one last look. That's when I heard it. Boots. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing in the corridor behind me. I turned around, expecting to see another tourist, but the hallway was completely empty. The boots stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound of keys, iron keys, jingling on a belt. Slow at first, then faster, closer, like someone was walking right toward me. I didn't wait to find out who. I ran until I caught up with the group, trying to act normal, even though my heart was pounding out of my chest. Later that night, scrolling through my camera roll, I stopped cold. There was a photo I didn't remember taking, blurry, but clear enough to see a man in an old military coat, standing in that same dungeon hallway, a ring of iron keys hanging from his belt. The picture was taken from a strange angle, like my phone had gone off by accident. But the proof was right there. I hadn't imagined it. I asked the guide later if they ever used actors or staff in costume. He just shook his head and said, "No, not today." That gave me chills. Edinburgh Castle isn't just full of history, it feels alive with it. Not the kind you read about in books, but the kind that lingers in the air. They say some of the soldiers and jailers never really left the dungeons, still walking those halls, checking cells that have been empty for hundreds of years. When you take a night shift job as a correctional officer, you expect long hours, difficult inmates, and the need to always stay alert. What no one prepares you for is what happens after the noise fades, when the halls go still and the silence feels heavier than the darkness itself. The story I'm about to tell comes from an officer who learned, just 3 months into the job, that not every inmate in a prison is listed on paper. I started working at a state prison about 3 months ago. I'm on the night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I work utility, which means I fill in wherever they need me. Now that I've gotten used to the routine, I've started noticing things I didn't see before. Small things, strange things. A few nights ago, around 4 a.m., I saw dark, smoky wisps moving across the front of the cell block. Not out of the corner of my eye, but right in front of me. They drifted and twisted for about 5 minutes, too fast to be smoke, and not all moving in the same direction. There's no air conditioning in this building, and the fans weren't even on. The next night it happened again. Same time, same cell house. I wanted to dismiss it as my imagination, but something about it felt real, too real. Then this morning around 4:20, I was sitting in front of the computer when I noticed movement behind me. I stopped what I was doing and watched. That's when I saw it. A crouched figure, human-shaped, gliding in front of a cell door before vanishing into thin air. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was there, and then it wasn't. It didn't scare me as much as it should have. Honestly, I was more fascinated than afraid. I don't know if what I saw is connected to the deaths we've had here recently, but I can't stop thinking about it. If those shapes really are lost souls, I hope they eventually find peace. Still, there's something haunting about the idea of spending eternity inside the same prison where you took your last breath. I'd always wanted to go urban exploring in an abandoned prison. When I finally got the chance, I didn't hesitate. If only I'd known what was waiting for me. This place was open to the public. You could pay for either a guided or self-guided tour of the entire grounds. And believe me, it was massive. I made my reservation, packed my gear, and drove out early that morning. A friendly tour guide greeted me when I arrived. I told him I was a horror author and a former corrections officer, that I wasn't just interested in the history, but the newer parts of the prison too. He pointed out the areas I'd want to check for both. I marked my map, noting where I could get the best photos, then planned my route. Before I left, he had me sign a clipboard, my name, time in, and an empty space for signing out. "Do you ever lose anybody?" I joked. He laughed, but it wasn't convincing. "You might be surprised," he said. As I started to walk off, he added one last thing. "See the buildings marked in black on your map? Don't go in them. Don't even go near them." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "You don't want to know," he muttered. "Let's just say it's dangerous." I brushed it off and started my tour. The first building looked more like a French manor than a prison. It was built of stone, still standing strong after all these years. I could picture it lasting another 100 easily. I took out my camera and phone, my phone for basic shots, and my camera for the creepy ones. The bright, cloudless sky made everything look almost beautiful. I had to mess with the camera settings just to make it look haunted. Stepping inside from the blinding sun, the interior felt like an old dance hall. Beyond the foyer stretched a huge open room, with brick floors and stone arches along one wall, arches that didn't lead anywhere. Either they'd been decorative or whatever was behind them had long been sealed. I turned toward one of the long hallways. It looked exactly like the kind of place ghost stories come from. I walked slowly, snapping pictures as I went. The sunlight poured through cracked windows, lighting up years of neglect. The hallway was lined with heavy metal doors, each with a small window, and every single pane of glass was shattered. Maybe vandals had gotten in, or maybe something else. At the end of the hall, I found a small metal room with bars across the door. That was my first real sign that this place had once held inmates. I peered inside, peeling paint, nothing else. No beds, no furniture, just emptiness. There was a stairwell nearby with steps leading both up and down. I decided to head up first for a better view. The railing felt loose, like it would give way at any second, but it held. My hand came away covered in old dirt. I stared at it for a moment, wondering how long that dust had been waiting for someone to disturb it. The upper floor offered amazing views of the rest of the prison grounds and much more decay. One room had a ceiling fan drooping like its blades had melted. I laughed quietly to myself and realized for the first time just how alone I was. My laugh echoed back down the hallway, only it didn't sound like me. I froze for a second, then shook it off as bad acoustics. At the end of the hallway was another stairwell, this one going down. A heavy metal grate covered the doorway. One of the rules the guide had drilled into me was simple. Don't open closed doors, and don't close open ones. When I'd asked why, he smiled nervously and said, "Because we might not have a key for that one. And if it shuts, it could be a while before anyone gets it open again." That stuck with me as I went down into the basement. The air grew colder. The smell of decay was thick. Even though it was cooler down there, the atmosphere felt heavier, like something was pressing down on me. The basement was in worse shape than the rest of the building. Ceilings had collapsed, paint hung in curling strips, and most of the windows were sealed or broken. I turned a corner and was swallowed by darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight. When I turned it on, the beam cut through the black. But instead of comfort, it just made the darkness beyond it feel alive, like it was closing in on me. A few steps in, my light landed on something painted in red letters across the wall. Help. It didn't look fresh, but it didn't look old either. I couldn't tell if someone was asking for help or offering it. Either way, I didn't stick around to think about it. A cold gust brushed past me. I turned and spotted a long hallway branching off from the main one. No doors, no light, just pipes running along the wall. My map showed a tunnel in this part of the building, though it didn't say where it led. I hesitated, and then curiosity won. The tunnel smelled damp, the air heavy with mildew. The ceiling was lower than the rest of the building, and the deeper I went, the smaller it felt. Before long, I was hunched over, trying not to scrape my head against the flaking ceiling. To that point, I'd only seen 3 other people all day, 2 far off on another path, and one leaving just as I entered. Down here, the silence pressed against my ears. Every movement I made echoed like a second pair of footsteps following me. More than once, I spun around and shone my flashlight behind me. Nothing, just the echo bouncing off concrete. I told myself it was just the acoustics, but my pace quickened anyway. It probably took me 15 minutes to walk that tunnel, though it felt like hours. I passed a few side passages but ignored them, keeping straight until I saw a thin beam of light ahead, the light at the end of the tunnel. Then, a sound behind me. This time it wasn't an echo. It was sharp, metallic, like a rock dropping onto concrete. I froze. My light darted back down the tunnel, but the beam showed nothing. Not even a rock. The hairs on my neck stood up. I turned and walked faster toward the light, heart pounding. The tunnel finally opened into what looked like an old laundry room. Huge industrial washers and dryers stood against the walls, their glass doors shattered. Sunlight poured in from broken windows. I stepped outside into the blinding heat and took a deep breath of fresh air. For a second I felt relief, until I realized nothing around me looked familiar. I pulled out my map and traced my location. Somehow I'd walked nearly the entire length of the property, from the southern edge clear to the north. I wiped sweat from my forehead, put my map away, and looked at the buildings nearby. To my left was one marked on the map, the mess hall. And after what I'd just experienced, it was the perfect place to get photos for my next ghost story. So I went left. I was expecting rows of tables when I stepped into the mess hall. But instead, I was met with nothing but empty space. It was like the room itself had swallowed its own history. I moved toward the kitchen. And what really shocked me was that the smell of old grease still hung in the air. Thick and stubborn, like the ghost of 1,000 meals that would never be eaten again. Down a narrow hallway, I thought I heard voices echoing, distant, muffled but human. I figured they had to be other explorers. The sound gave me a weird comfort, like I wasn't completely alone. Eventually, I wound up in the RHU section, the restricted housing unit, the one part I'd been dying to see. I wanted pictures of the cells, especially the small outdoor recreation cages for my book. The outdoor rec yard wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It was half chain link fence, half plexiglass, with razor wire stretched across the top like a silver crown of punishment. The entire thing was barely 5 feet wide and maybe 15 long. I tried to imagine spending your only outdoor time in that box. The thought made my skin crawl. That's when I heard it, the door slamming shut somewhere inside. I froze, waiting for the other explorers to appear, but no one came. The air went still. I slowly left the outdoor pen and stepped into the RHU building itself. Every cell door was hanging open, except one. I couldn't remember if that door had been closed when I first passed through. I tried to shake the thought, but then I remembered stories I'd read online, ones written by inmates. This place had held 2 well-known serial killers before they died. I couldn't remember if either of them had died here in RHU, and I decided I really didn't want to know. I snapped a few quick photos of the cells and moved on faster than I meant to. The next building looked like it. It was made for low-security inmates. No bars on the doors or windows, just empty rooms. As I walked through the hallway, I spotted something weird, a gray box with a red light blinking on the floor. Curious, I moved closer and saw through a doorway a man and a woman surrounded by gear. Cameras, microphones, video monitors, a whole setup. Thinking I just stumbled onto some kind of film shoot, I apologized for interrupting and backed out fast. Across from that building stood a small chapel. I stepped inside, took a few pictures, then made my way down to the basement. Sure enough, another tunnel waited down there. I didn't need to think twice. No way was I getting lost again. I turned right back around and returned to the main building. When I told the guides what happened, they laughed about me, getting turned around but stopped, smiling when I mentioned the man and woman with the equipment. They said no film crews were scheduled that day. In fact, they couldn't even remember anyone hauling in gear like that. I stared at them, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. They swore it wasn't. Then one of them said something that made my stomach turn, that the building I saw them in was the one most popular with paranormal investigators, not eager to dig deeper into that mystery. I asked about the other buildings I hadn't explored yet. They pointed out the newer wings, one with modern equipment, another used for medical treatment, and finally, the morgue. All of them sat along the same path. I thanked them and started off again, determined to finish strong. The first stop was Cell Block D, one of the newer ones, built about 30 years ago. It was supposed to be the model for the state's modern prisons. As soon as I walked in, I felt oddly calm. The design reminded me of the facility I used to work in, just bigger, colder, emptier. The block was shaped like a massive triangle, with the day room centered between 3 tiers of cells. I started taking pictures, wide shots, angles of the catwalks, the upper levels. Oddly, the toilets and sinks had been removed from every single cell. That felt wrong. Who takes the toilets from an abandoned prison? 2 other explorers entered while I was working. We talked for a bit, comparing notes. One of them still worked in a state facility, It was nice, normal even, to talk with someone who spoke the same language. After they left, I crossed to the opposite side of the block, which was a mirror image of the first. But it didn't feel the same. The moment I stepped inside, the air got heavier, thick, oppressive. Even the skylight above seemed dimmer than the one on the other side. I couldn't explain it. I pulled out my flashlight to peer into the corners, trying to ignore the cold feeling building in my chest. I told myself to focus. I was here to take pictures, that was it. I found a cell that wasn't too filthy and decided to take a few shots from inside, facing out toward the block. Then I turned toward the window, noticing how much darker the sky had grown. Clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the light. That's when I heard a soft creak. I spun around and my blood ran cold. The cell door was closing. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. But no, it was really moving. Slowly, steadily shutting me in. Panic hit like a lightning strike. I remembered the rule the guides had told me at the start: never close a door. They didn't have keys for all of them. If it's shut, you might be stuck inside for a while. I lunged, shoving my foot into the door frame just before it latched. Pain shot through my foot, hard enough to make me gasp. But it worked. I slammed my shoulder into the door, forcing it open until it banged against the wall. I stumbled out into the day room, breathing fast, scanning the rows for whoever thought this was funny. Nothing. Every cell empty. Every shadow still. My body went cold. I darted from one end of the block to the other, looking for someone hiding. Anyone. There was no one. That's when the fear hit full force. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled. I needed out. I ran for the main entrance, grabbed the handle, locked. I yanked, shoved, kicked, but it wouldn't budge. I turned toward the other side of the block. That door, too, was closed tight. Panic turned to desperation. My only hope was a side exit I'd noticed earlier in the day, near where I'd first come out of the tunnel. I sprinted through the block, heart hammering in my ears. I didn't even stop to check if anything was behind me. I just ran. When I hit the door, I threw my shoulder into it, and it burst open. But I didn't count on the stairs outside. I tumbled down 5 concrete steps and landed face first in knee-high, grasped beside a tree. For a second, I just lay there, gasping, half laughing, half crying. I was out. I looked up at the sky. When I'd entered the building, it had been bright and nearly 90 degrees. Now the world was cloaked in shadow. Thick clouds had rolled in, blotting out the sun. The air felt cooler, heavier. It looked like twilight, but it couldn't have been. I checked the timestamps on my phone, from the first photo I took to the last. 28 minutes. That was it. How could the sky have gone dark that fast? I pushed the question aside and focused on one thing: getting as far away from that building as possible. I took off running through the tall grass, heading for the asphalt road that cut through the center of the prison grounds. After a few wrong turns, I finally reached it and stopped to look back. The building stood silent, almost innocent in the fading light. But I wasn't fooled. Maybe it was the storm clouds. Or maybe it was something else. Either way, I was done. Being outside again made me feel 100 pounds lighter. I stood there, breathing hard, debating whether to explore the next building, or just call it a day. I already had plenty of the pictures I'd come for. Walking away wouldn't have been a failure. But my mind wouldn't stop arguing with itself. That's when I saw him. A man standing in one of the upper windows of a nearby building. I hadn't noticed him before, but the place was massive, so that didn't really surprise me. I smiled and gave him a small wave. He didn't wave back. He didn't even blink. He just stared at me, motionless. That was enough to make up my mind. I turned and headed in the opposite direction, toward the last building on my list. This one was the one I'd been waiting for, the morgue. The creepy factor on this place was off the charts. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. The air was heavier, colder. The first floor was filled with old exam tables and dusty patient chairs, and they looked incredible in a macabre kind of way. Snapping pictures of those alone almost made the whole trip worth it. The bonus would be getting some shots of the morgue itself. I headed down the stairs and followed the hallway until I reached the room marked morgue. But it wasn't empty like I expected. Instead, there was a crowd, at least a dozen people. packed around something in the middle of the room. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, murmuring, trying to see what was happening up front. I couldn't see over them. So I found an old chair in a nearby room, dragged it in, and climbed on top to get a better view. When I finally saw what was happening, my stomach twisted. The man at the front was wearing a white gown stained with red. He was performing an autopsy, a real one. The body on the table was a woman, dressed in a green top and white shorts. Her chest was open, her rib cage split wide. The man was holding her heart in his hand. I gasped, and that was a mistake. Every single person in the room, including the man in the blood-stained gown, turned to look at me. Their faces were blank, pale, eyes empty. It wasn't the kind of look you get when you interrupt something awkward. This was colder, darker. Their eyes felt heavy on me, like hands pressing down. My body wanted to run, but my mind froze, unable to process what I was seeing. When the group began to move, when they all turned toward me at once, my body took over. I jumped down, nearly twisting my ankle, and bolted. I ran down the hallway without daring to look back, flying up the stairs two at a time until I burst through the main door and into the open air. The moment I felt the wind on my face, some of the panic slipped away, but not all of it. I didn't stop running. I'd seen enough. I didn't need another picture. I didn't need proof. I just wanted out. But I skidded to a stop. Standing in the path ahead of me was the man from the window. The same one who'd been staring at me. He stood perfectly still, blocking the way, just watching me. My skin crawled. I turned and sprinted down another path, trying to keep my backpack from slipping off. I rounded a corner between two buildings and froze again. There he was, standing there. It was impossible. He couldn't have gotten there before me. But there he was, waiting, calm, not even breathing hard. Panic took over completely. I turned and ran down the last remaining path toward the main building, the only way left to escape. But as soon as I rounded the bend, there he was again, standing dead center in the road. I stopped, gasping for air. He didn't move. He just watched me. Then I heard the others, the people from the morgue, coming up behind me. I could hear their footsteps closing in. My choices vanished. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran straight at him. He didn't flinch. I lowered my shoulder, ready to slam into him. But when I reached him, there was nothing there. Just an icy cold wave that passed through me. Then I was on the other side. I almost fell forward but kept running, sprinting until I could see the main building ahead. The people from the morgue were spreading out, cutting through side paths, trying to head me off, but I didn't slow down. When I reached the main building, I didn't stop to think. I threw the door open and ran inside, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was going to say, whether I'd scream at the guides for some sick joke or warn them to get out. But when I reached the front desk, the room was empty, completely empty. The chairs, the pamphlets, the reception table, all still there. But no people, no sound, no sign of life. I grabbed one of the maps they'd handed out earlier that morning and crushed it in my hand. I didn't even have time to think before I heard a door creak open in the back. I didn't look. I bolted out the front. The parking lot was empty. Every car was gone, and all except mine. This morning there had been at least a dozen. Now nothing, not even tire tracks. Questions could wait. I dove into my car, turned the key, and peeled out of there faster than I've ever driven in my life. I didn't slow down until I was miles away. But even then, something felt wrong. When I got home, everything looked the same. My house, my street, my furniture. But it all felt off. Like the world had shifted half an inch out of place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Even when I knew I was alone. Days passed, and I kept trying to make sense of what happened. I went back online to look for the prison's website. But it was gone, completely erased as if it had never existed. I tried searching for news, asking around in forums, posting the pictures I'd taken. No one responded. Not one view, not one comment. It was like the internet itself was rejecting them. Then this morning I finally got a message. No name, no profile picture, just words. Go back the way you came. It took me a while to understand what that meant. Longer still to accept what I already knew deep down. I didn't belong here anymore. I didn't want to go back, but I had to. I packed my gear and drove back to the prison. It was just as empty as when I'd left it. No cars, no people, no sound. I pulled out my old map and traced the quickest route to cell block D, the place where it all started. I slipped inside quietly, moving through shadows, heading for the back exit that led to the yard. Halfway there, he appeared again, and the man. I tried the same move as before, running straight through him. But this time he was ready. As I passed through, I felt a hand clamp onto my backpack. My body jerked backward, and suddenly I was being dragged down the hall, through the corridor, until the world seemed to fold in on itself. When I opened my eyes, I was inside RHU, inside a cell. He stood outside the bars watching me. Not moving, not speaking, just watching.
I curled up on the bunk, trying to stay awake.
When I heard something and a banging sound, it came from another cell down the row. I ran to the door and shouted, "Hello?" A voice answered, "Hello. Are you stuck here too?" I asked. "That depends," they said quietly. "On what? Are you human? Or one of them?" I let out a weak laugh. "I'm human. I think I got pulled over when I was in deep lock." "Wait, were you the guard I talked to before?" "Yeah," she said. "Did you get pulled through right after me?" "Seems like it." "What about your friend?" I asked. "We got separated," she replied. I haven't seen her since. "Remind me what she was wearing," I asked, my stomach twisting. "A green top and white shorts. Why?" I lowered my head. "I'm sorry, but I know where she is." "Where?" she whispered. "In the morgue." Silence, then a soft sob. After a while, she spoke again. "Are you sure?" I didn't answer. She already knew. Finally, she said, "I didn't get your name before." "It's Mike," I said. "Yours?" "Celia." "Nice to meet you, Celia." "Same here," she said quietly. "I just wish it wasn't here." "At least it took them longer to find you," she said after a moment. "I was gone," I told her. "I'd left the property." "Then why the hell would you come back?" I told her about the message, the missing website, the strange words, "Go back the way you came." She was quiet for a long time. "So, you think we're not in our own world?" "I think the only way back is through D Block," I said. She sighed. "That's a lot to take in." "I have a plan," I told her. "But first, have they been feeding you?" "Yeah, they come around 3 times a day, just like in a real prison." "Maybe that's exactly what they are, guards who can't leave. Spirits bound to this place, like us." "Yeah, but not for long," I told her. "They should be around soon." "Let's hope your plan works," she whispered. An hour passed before the food hatch slid open. A sandwich dropped through. The man glanced at me, blank-faced, then walked on. 5 minutes later, I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin metal wedge wrapped in duct tape. I pressed it against the lock, took out my hammer, and hit it hard. The lock snapped open with a sharp pop. I crept down the hall to Celia's cell and passed her the wedge and hammer through the bars. Within minutes, she was free too. She handed my tools back and we slipped into the corridor, keeping to the shadows as we made our way toward D Block. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. When we reached the front door, I felt something wasn't right. I grabbed the handle. It opened easily. "I don't think this is the way," I said, holding it open. "What other way is there?" Celia asked. "Go back the way you came," I muttered. "That's what the message said." "So this is the way we came," she argued. "No, it's not," I said firmly. "I came through the side door. That's where we need to go." I started toward it, but Celia stepped in front of me. "That's not the right way," she said. "Okay," I sighed. "We'll try it your way." We stepped through the front door together. "So how did it happen for you?" she asked. "I was on the left side when I met you and your friend, then went over to the right. As soon as I did, everything changed. Then the portal should be here in the reception area," she said, waving her hands in front of her like she was feeling for something invisible. "It's not working," she said after a while. "I've got one more theory," I replied. "Come with me." We went back to the left side of the block.
"I was in this cell when things got weird," I told her, stepping inside.
She followed me. I traced my fingers along the wall, pretending to look for something. Then I stepped out and slammed the door, locking her inside. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "It's a surprise," I said. "Just hang tight." I ran out through the front and circled around to the side door, the same one I escaped from before. It opened easily, just like last time. Inside, the air felt thick, electric, like the building itself was holding its breath. I sprinted across the block. Just before reaching the other side, Celia appeared in front of the door. I froze. "How the hell did you get here?" I said. Her eyes burned with anger. "No thanks to you." I stepped around her and grabbed the door handle. It was locked. "How did you get here?" I asked again. "It must have locked after I came through," she said coolly. "Help me open it," I said, yanking at it. We both pulled, but it didn't budge. "Any other exits?" I asked. "Not sure," she said. "What about the side door?" "What about it?" "It was open before. Go check if it's still unlocked." She nodded and ran down the hall while I reached into my pack again. Grabbing my hammer and wedge, I jammed it into the lock and hit it once. Nothing. Twice. Still nothing. On the third swing, I heard, "What are you doing?" Celia's voice whispered right next to my ear. I turned slowly. She was standing right beside me, grinning. "I was just trying the same trick as before," I said quietly. "I don't think it'll work this time," she said. "Why not?" "Because this door's different." Her grin spread wider, unnaturally wide. "I know," I said. "Just like I know you're not who you pretend to be." Her smile froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean it was you all along," I said. "You locked me in. You dragged that woman to the morgue. I was just your next victim. I wasn't supposed to escape, but I did." The grin split her face from ear to ear. Her eyes sank into black holes. Her voice twisted, layered with dozens of others. "You're right," she hissed. "You escaped the trap, but instead of running, you came back." "Yeah," I said. "And that's exactly why I'll make it out again." She laughed, a chorus of screams and whispers blending together. "You're not going anywhere," she said, snatching the hammer from my hand. "There's one thing you didn't count on," I said. "What's that?" "I already opened the door." I pulled hard and the door burst open with a rush of freezing wind. She swung at me, but I ducked, diving through and slamming it shut behind me. Her scream shook the walls, but it was muffled, fading. Then I saw her hand burst through, claws digging into my wrist. I yelled, trying to break free, but her grip was iron. My hand inched toward the door, then stopped. I stared at her and smiled through the pain. "It only works if I go willingly, doesn't it?" I said, "You can't take me back." Her face twisted into a nightmare of teeth and shadow. Then her tone changed. Calm. "I can't force you back," she said, "but I can leave you something to remember me by." She crushed my wrist. I screamed as bones snapped like dry twigs. Then she let go. I stumbled back, clutching my ruined wrist. As she smiled from the other side of the door, I raised my middle finger with my broken hand, and she just chuckled before fading away. I stepped into the sunlight, gasping. I walked until I couldn't anymore, then collapsed. My hand throbbed, wrapped in makeshift bandages from my kit. Every shadow made me flinch, but I kept going until I reached the main building. Inside, the tour guide from last week stared at me in shock. You're back," he stammered. "Yeah," I said. "Took a little detour.